Good evening, boa noite to all you people. My name is Paulo Bertol. I'm a biologist in Stinapa, Bonaire. I have been working here in Bonaire for 11 years, but I have been working with lionfish, as our topic today, for actually 13 years. That is more or less the time that Stinapa started to manage the lionfish. So there's a long time that I've been involved on that. In Stinapa Bonaire, I do a lot of work, but basically I really involved in all the invasive species. Invasive species are the species that don't belong to some place or ecosystem, but can do some damage for the local species. And lionfish is one of the main invasive species that we have in the marine environment. Tonight we have with me, my colleague Roxanne Francisca, that is a biologist too, and is involved in the monitoring of lionfish. And we have the honor to have Judith, the marine park manager for our beautiful marine park. And my former colleague Anuska also, that have been working long time ago in Stinapa as communication coordinator. So I think we will have questions more for the end of the session, and what we will see basically is what we have been doing in the 13 years that we are doing the monitoring. I will talk a little bit about the history of the invasion of lionfish in Caribbean. Maybe for some of you will be not news, but always there's people that is learning that. We have also Lio, that is the assistant manager from the Marine Park here. So let's start. Tonight we will talk a little bit about the history of the invasion in general in the Caribbean, here in Bonaire, and where the lionfish reach recently in this invasion, about the monitoring that the Stinapa have been doing and the results of this monitoring, some key points and some conclusions. So let's go. Well, the lionfish control in Bonaire starts actually before the lionfish arrive. The first lionfish that we found in Bonaire was in October 26, 2009. One day after, October 27, they found the first lionfish in Curaçao. That don't mean that they arrived in Curaçao one day later. That just means that in Bonaire, divers found first, then Curaçao. And before the lionfish arrived, the control plan began with informative workshops involving the government and one key part of the plan, the dive industry. So the marine park, after we found the first lionfish in Bonaire, immediately activated the second phase of the plan of control. That was involve a lot of volunteers and give information for the population. If we look, this is how it started. In Florida, early in the 90s, 80s, they start to see some lionfish. In the beginning, like most of the invasions, was beautiful, was nice to see something different. So then it started to spread. So then in 2009, arrived in the south of Caribbean. And it's impressive, this small animation, because show how fast it spread. And I don't know if some of you attend the presentation of Roxanne last week about the stony coral thistle loss disease. Biologists are really good in finding, really difficult names for different stuff. The way that the disease is spread is a little bit similar than the lionfish. So that shows that sometimes people, but could be this, could be that, but in general, the way that things spread in the Caribbean are similar.
Okay. Going the invasion took several years to the lionfish cross one part that was this. What we have here is the delta of the Amazonas that put a lot of fresh water in the ocean. So just in 2020 is that we have the first signs of lionfish that was similar in one small archipelago called Fernando de Noronha, that is basically, it's not between Brazil and Africa, but it's like 300 kilometers from the shore of Brazil. In the same week, there is fishermen that start to catch lionfish in the delta of Amazonas in lobster traps. We have another lionfish that they found close to Rio de Janeiro, but that was an isolated case, was years, like 2 years before this. And the conclusion was that was from the aquarium trade that some people just release. Because it don't make sense that show up in the south and not in the north of Brazil. So then 2021, it started to spread. 22, spread more. And yeah, 23, we already have lionfish here. The prediction of NOAA is that the lionfish can go to the shore of Uruguay, really in the south. Probably cannot reproduce there because the water is too cold, but can do damage in all this shore. Coming back to Bonaire, with the arrival of lionfish, the dive shops began to give divers information during the orientation of the marine park. The divers were given markers to mark the location of the lionfish in the reef, and will alert the marine park. I don't know how much of you guys participate in that time, but in that time we have, you know, this flag tape with a cork that when divers see the lionfish, they put in a dead part of the coral reef and alert the Stinapa, so then volunteers go there to try to catch. In that time, in the first moments, was the staff of Stinapa and was using nets. So this is how it looks like in the reef. So you have the alert, oh, I found a lionfish, 20 meters deep, 15 minutes south of the mooring buoy of whatever, Ilma Hooker. And the staff go there and try to catch the lionfish with this net. The nice stuff about these invasions is that in the beginning, the size of the fish is more or less the same. So obviously it was small fish, the net was working, besides it was a plastic net. So near the end of 2009, the Marine Park began training volunteers in lionfish removal techniques. The rangers held more than 40 training workshops. So the method was spotting, marking, and reporting. The Marine Park in that time have an online Excel sheet and people report, we put there, and a group of volunteers with this kind of tag go there to try to catch the fish. The information was updated in this database, and the Marine Park have in that time one dedicated staff just to coordinate the program. The dive shops put posters with information, and we are in some way really lucky that in 10-10-10, the change of the laws, the change of the status of Bonaire was the right time to change the legislation. The lionfish arrived in 2009, Bonaire was very well prepared, so it was easy to Stinapa suggest to the government to change the legislation and allow the use of some tools to do kind of spear fishing with lionfish. So what kind of save of reefs in the past that was banned the spear fishing was a new method to try to save the reef. Like now, where's Roxanne? My colleague Roxanne is trying to find ways to save the reef again, because we have this new disease. So it was a really good moment that we changed the legislation. I need to say, I'm Brazilian, from a Brazilian perspective, we are really lucky the way that we put the law, because give a lot of freedom to Judith to manage the lionfish control. So in 2011, we start to distribute the elves. In that year, we distribute around 300 elves. Right now, I'm pretty sure that it's way more than 450 elves that we distribute in Bonaire. We start with the mandatory course, but in that time the course was made by Stinapa. The personal contract, the Marine Park, have a personal contract with the Marine Park to carry on the elf, and the divers still using in that time the bag to have the lionfish. That was not so handy, because after you put a lot of lionfish here, some spines start to coming out. And imagine, swim with that bag full of spines was not so nice. So in 2012, the dive centers began to teach the lionfish hunter course for the tourists and local. The locals may apply to use an elf from Stinapa after completing the mandatory training course that was made in the dive shops. The tourists are allowed to use the elves after completing the course with a local guide from a dive shop. And the lionfish hunters began using zookeepers or similar devices. That was really, really, really helpful. And what we have right now, when I talk right now, is not really, really right now. There is some old information, but the dive centers offer lionfish hunter courses. The restaurants are offering lionfish in the menu, and these really help the control. When you need to deal with some invasive species that is not tasted, let's put it that way, is really difficult. A lot of islands need to deal, for example, with invasion of rats. Not too much people like to eat rats. So in that case, it's difficult. To have one idea is a little bit old data, but in 2014, the largest restaurant that was buying lionfish bought almost 1 ton of lionfish. In 2018 was 150 kilos. That don't mean that the consume goes down, just means that that restaurant in particular that have a really good control in everything that they bought buy a little bit less, or a lot less. Most of the lionfish caught is the lionfish that people go home and eat at home. It's not all the people that want to sell lionfish, but you still have some people that prefer to sell, but most of the lionfish is people that go home and cook at home. Other interesting stuff that we use right now is the heat pads for first aid. So this is one of the restaurants that I think most of the lionfish hunters know, that do really good burgers. And this is the heat pads. So basically, is this that is really handy to have, for example, in the car or in the boat. And if you get stung, what you need to do is just this. Press this little metal, and the liquid here start to form like crystals, and it's really hot. So you can use for first aid, because as divers know, the main first aid for lionfish stung is hot water or something hot. We normally don't have hot water in the car or in the boat, so this is really easy to use. You can use again. Sorry? This? I buy this in Amazon, or the zookeeper have to sell. Not at the moment. Good question from Anuska. We can reuse this. You just put in hot water, boiled water for 5 minutes, stay cold, it's ready to reuse. Yeah, you guys can pass by to film. Okay, continue with the control. Actual, we have a lot of volunteers, and they are permitted to hunt everywhere except in the reserves. With the new situation, we know that everywhere means till Carpata at this moment, and if you go to climb Bonaire, till 2 o'clock in the afternoon at this moment. So these are temporary measures that we have to try to help our reefs with the new disease. To maintain the density low and keep the volunteers enthusiastic, we try as much as possible open the dive reserves exclusively for lionfish hunters. But we found some problems. COVID was a problem in some moment that we could not do public events. Imagine all the people together during COVID in a boat is not really nice. And the stony coral tissue loss disease is another problem for us right now. We are trying to safeguard the reserves as much as possible because we know that the coral reef there is really important. That's why the last lionfish derby that we did was from Punt Vierkant to south. I hope soon we can have different measures and we can do lionfish derbies again in the reserves because it's really important as we've seen the numbers. This is basically a flow chart about everything that we did here in Bonaire to control lionfish. So we prepared the plan in advance, we did workshops, we have the first lionfish, so then we start to implement the plan, adapt the legislation, we train volunteers, we did a lot of communication, we provide tools for the volunteers and discussed a lot of not just money but time for the marine park is a huge work. We start to do campaigns to people start to eat lionfish. We have more demand from the restaurants for lionfish in a way that sometimes the hunters don't have enough lionfish to provide to the restaurants. This make for Bonaire a better price. Bonaire is the island in the whole Caribbean that the price of the lionfish is higher. So we can think, oh, this is not so good because I cannot taste lionfish. In other hands, this keeps people enthusiastic to catch lionfish. There is no island that the price of the lionfish that the restaurants pay is so expensive like Bonaire. The normal is $15 per kilo of lionfish without the guts and spines, or $50 per kilo of fillet. There's no other island that have these prices. This makes some profit for the divers. In other hands, we involve the dive shops to generate profit to the dive shops, for more volunteers that will, maybe try to make more profit from that. But the result is this, overfishing of lionfish, and we have a low density. These have been working very well in the last years, but to test that and to validate what we are doing, Stinapa started in 2011 a lionfish density survey. In the beginning was including Curaçao, was 12 locations in Curaçao. We did in the years of 2011, 12 and 13, and 24 locations in Bonaire. In that time, Curaçao was not doing too much with lionfish, and we want to compare the numbers. What we do is transects of 50 meters long, 2 meters each side. This covers 200 square meters of reef in each transect that we do. The transects are at 15, 25, and 35 meters. So as you can see, it's a kind of deep dive. That's why the divers that participate on that use some techniques of technical diving, spare tanks, and basically this kind of dive is solo diving. because you are in the transit, and if you have more divers, will influence in the behavior of the lionfish. So in each year we cover around 31,000 square meters of reef. Is a lot. And because it's always the same people doing is stuff from Stinapa, so we can compare all the years. And we know there's people that can detect lionfish better. There's people that, you know, lionfish sometimes is in small caves, it's difficult to detect. But it's the same people all the time, so it's people very well trained. And in some moment we start to think, we cover a lot of reef. It's a lot of information. Sometimes we don't have too much lionfish that we count. We can use to count other target species. So, like 2 years, no, Rox? 2-3 years ago, 2 years, we start to include some key species for the marine park. We just start to generate data, but we include some big groupers. We include big groupers, barracudas, lobsters, and sharks. Yeah, but sharks, so far, it's 0. But it's data that we are generating for the marine park in key species. Yeah, this is one example. It's a beautiful picture of Lorenzo, that we can see the lionfish and the line of the transect. What we do when we are doing this survey, we pass with a reel, we find some dead coral, we pass the reel in the dead coral, and we continue. So when we go, we count 2 meters from the transect. When we come back, we count the other 2 meters. And this makes that we cover all this amount of reef. And the most interesting stuff, the results. In red, we can see Curaçao in the first 3 years. 2014 was one year that we jumped. We could not make the survey. But if we can see the density don't change too much in Bonaire, except for the last 2 years, we have an increase. And that is real. Why? We still don't know very well. We are really curious to do 2023 to see what is coming from there. But in 2020, if we see, was a little bit of decrease. My perception, but that's just my perception, is that what happened in that year? COVID. We have the lockdown. A lot of the dive masters, of the dive instructors, went home. There's no work to do. What they can do? Hunt lionfish. So they have been really serious in the water hunting lionfish. What happens in 2021 and 22? The economy reopened. I think all the people that live here remember how busy the island was. The dive shops really need more staff, and there is no staff. So all the people are really busy. Nobody have time to hunt lionfish. So probably it's normal that the density will increase a little bit. Let's see what 2023 will bring to us. We do this survey normally in November, October, and December. This is a comparison between fished and no-fished areas. We consider no-fished areas the 2 reserves that we have, the William Alexander and the Maxima Reserve. The Maxima Reserve is also known like Islagbai Reserve, and King Alexander is Carpata Reserve. As we expect, the density in the reserves always is higher than the areas that the volunteers can go every day. It's interesting that in 2020, where the volunteers did amazing work because the economy was closed, we have this decrease. But in the reserves was more lionfish. And we could not do any action in the reserves in that year because lockdowns, etc., etc. The other stuff that we look in terms of overfishing, there is a tendency when you have overfishing is that the size of the fish start to be smaller or decrease. So we could see some years that the size go a little bit smaller. 2020 was a little bit big. 21, 22 is a little bit smaller. That graph don't say too much, it's a little bit stable. But if we compare the reserves and outside the reserves, we can see that in areas that this graph is a little bit different, the fished areas is in red, and unfished, that means the reserves, in blue. If we see the size of the fish in the reserves is bigger. It's exactly what we expect. And just to compare, it's really difficult to find data from all the Caribbean in the same year. When we try to do that, the unique year that was a little bit more possible to find data for different islands and different places was around 2013. If we see, Bonaire was really, really lower comparing other places. There is places that was really crazy, like Bahamas. I'm really looking forward to try to update a little bit this graph, but it's difficult to find, new data from different islands in the same year. Just to have one idea, we do the monitoring in the reef, but what happened behind the reef in deep water? So this is one place 50 meters deep. It's not the best film ever, but if we see, every single spot is a lionfish. 50 meters deep. That means that, okay, we control very well the lionfish in the reef, but in deep water, still have a lot of fish. And every single habitat that they have is full of fish. In, I think, more or less 2013, something like that, I did a dive with the substation from Curaçao here in front of Town Pier, and 100 meters deep was full of lionfish in each small rock, small pipe, small structure or habitat that they have. So apparently the abundance of lionfish is higher in no recreational limits of diving. The tech dive can be an option, but there is some risks to do that. One risk is the increasing of the risk, because just do the tech dive is itself some risk. When you do extra activity doing tech dive, you are increasing your risk to do the dive itself. The other risk is the possibility that a diver needs to deal with a sting of lionfish and complete the decoy stops. So we have some cases in the island, including some diver that I know, and that could be the consequence when you need to do the safety stops and you need to deal with the sting of lionfish, and you need to choose, okay, what I do now? I complete my decoy stops and deal with the pain, or I will try to deal with the pain and have the risk to go to the chamber. So it's a risk. And one of the stuffs that we do here is the derbies. Technically, Bonaire don't need derbies because we have plenty of really good volunteers in the reef every day. So it's not that we need to really put effort to these volunteers because they are already doing a great job. But we have the reserves, and as we see before, the reserves have a high density. So the lionfish hunters control very well the population, but the reserves can be one area that we need to stimulate more control. The focus for us could be the King Alexander Reserve, the Maxima Reserve, that this is Lagby, and Washington Park also, because it's one place that not too much people go to do lionfish hunting. Also the park closes 5 o'clock, and we know that one of the best times to hunt lionfish is in the dusk time. So Stinapa is always looking to do these actions. It's not possible to do as much we want, but we are trying. Right now, we have been dealing in the last 3 years with COVID, with the new disease. And I hope that soon we can do more. The other point that is a point of attention is the interaction with fauna when we are hunting. So this is a rule. We need to avoid feeding any wildlife. It's a marine park. It's in the rules and regulations of the marine park. But sometimes people push. All the people like, oh, let's try to feed a Muri, and maybe the Muri will learn that lionfish is tasty and will focus just in lionfish. It's wrong, not happen. Let's feed a shark because it's nice to see a shark. Always this experience and bad. In Cayman Islands, they did that with groupers, and the groupers start to be really annoying with the divers, following the divers in all the dives, and the National Park Authority from there need to really prohibit people to give lionfish for the groupers. So, to avoid situations like that, no feed any wildlife and always use a zookeeper. We have some years ago one case of a diver that was without a zookeeper doing lionfish hunting, and in some moment he could not see a Muri coming, and the consequences was not so good for the diver. This is a nice picture. The other picture that I have is before the guy went to the hospital. So could be really, really worse than this. So let's try to avoid that. The other point that is really good to start to do is use a spotter for safety. If you think that something can happen with any predator, that could be a green Muri or a shark, use a spotter. Use someone just to stay paying attention around when you are hunting. It's way more comfortable to you as a hunter if you have that person helping you. And I have been passing for this situation, that green Muris come. I have been passing with some situation that a shark was around, and if you have a spotter, this will be way, way better. If you see any predator present, avoid hunting. You see a green Muri and you see a big lionfish close, don't try, don't take the risk. Do not use knives to kill the lionfish. In the beginning, we tried to do that because it was more fair for the fish, to put the fish dead in the zookeeper. But the consequence of that, we are putting more blood in the water, and also a lot of divers, when they try to do that, they put the lionfish against the reef. So we are removing the lionfish to protect the reef, but you start to put a knife on the reef, is not nice. Bring all the fish that you catch with you. So don't start to spread small fish. Oh, this is small, I will just put in the reef. Predators can start to look for that and associate the lionfish hunting with food. And that is what creates situations later. And any situation or incident that you have, try to report for Stinapa. We cannot think and change the way that we hunt lionfish that have been a success in terms of control if we don't have information. So share your information. If you have, was a green Muri that was a little bit aggressive, but you just keep that for yourself, Judith, me, Roxanne, Lyle, we cannot change or see what we can do to help the divers too. So bring information to us. This is my email. This is the email of Judith. So send information for us. We have some years ago, including Bonaire, a disease that was a kind of ulcerative skin disease. So far, is still no positive identification about the cause. That not surprise me. Like the new disease, also no rocks. We still don't know for sure if it's a bacteria, a virus. And you can see how much time took to scientists find something for corona. That was something that we need, you know, vaccination, we need more information, but sometimes science need to take some time to get information. So we still don't know very much about that, but if you see fish with that ulcerative disease, do not eat the fish, and try also not have any direct contact with the fish, and bring the fish outside the water and put outside the water in some place obviously that nobody will walk over the fish. Why bring outside the water? You are helping to not spread for other fishes. But so far, in the last year, when we did the survey, we not found any lionfish with the ulcerative disease. And in the last times that I have been hunting, also I don't see any. That don't mean that it's over, but we need to keep one eye on that. So conclusions. Bonaire lionfish hunters have been doing a great job in lionfish control. We are a model for other islands and other countries. All the people is looking again to Bonaire about what we are doing. You know, Bonaire is kind of leading conservation, is a leading control of invasive species, not just in the ocean. And this generated years ago a paper, a scientific paper in 2013 that showed that overfishing can work to help to control lionfish. We have kept the density stable in low numbers since the first sighting, with some exception, still not a huge density, but we saw that increase a little bit in the last 2 years. The reserves need to be open regularly during the derby events, and these always will be announced in Bonaire Lionfish Hunters Facebook community. So that is one of the main ways that we communicate with all the hunters. So if someone here is a hunter and is not in that community yet, please do that, because it's an easy way to you guys know what we are doing. Also in Stinapa Facebook page, Instagram, etc. And one of the most important stuff that we have here in Bonaire is an open communication with the dive industry, the volunteers, and this is the best way to control lionfish. I have been seeing other countries that don't have the same communication that we have here, and they have been struggle to control the lionfish very well. And our work has been recognized for other countries. So this is a small chapter that happened 2 years ago. The lionfish arrived in Brazil in 2020. The authorities in Brazil know that there was a crazy Brazilian working in some island in Caribbean that was doing a good work. And they invite me to go there and teach the people, the staff of the National Park Authority and the staff from the dive industry in how to deal with lionfish. New York Times published, you know, a really beautiful text about the lionfish hunting here in Bonaire and the control, with the beautiful pictures of Lorenzo. I think most of the people know Lorenzo. So this is what happened when I went in Brazil, in this island, Fernando de Noronha. I did a presentation there for all the public that was in the island at that time, and the dive industry, and a lot of dive trips to teach, you know, the staff of the dive shops how to deal with lionfish. So it was really nice that after, I don't know, 10 years more or less, you know, I have been in the water again to do the start that we did in Bonaire years ago. When we start here in Bonaire, we don't have that amount of lionfish, and most of the volunteers train in bottles of, in plastic bottles with water, how to shoot, etc., etc. So we have the same experience in that island of Fernando de Noronha. And with that, I think I end the presentation. So thank you. I want to say thank you for all the lionfish hunters that are our volunteers, all the dive shops and staff of the dive shops, Stinapa staff that have been doing an amazing job all the time, and the people that take the beautiful pictures that I use in the presentation, Casper, Lorenzo, the people from Ocean Eyes, and also the restaurants, because they have an important role on the control. So this is it. So if someone have questions.
Now it works. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, wait. Because we also have people following the stream, so if we don't use the microphones, they can't hear us.
Well, that's okay, I can talk. Well, I was wondering, I saw this lionfish congregation on 15 meters deep, A lot of lionfish sitting there. Most lionfish you catch with the elf,
Yes.
Can you catch a lionfish with a fish and a hook?
Happens before, here in Bonaire. There's some people that report there that, and happen in Brazil also, that I know, in other islands.
If you have this 50-meter deep congregation of lionfish, you put a fish and a hook down there, and do they bite or?
Happen. The unique tricky part is that you need to, find a way that you put your hook exactly in the habitat of the lionfish. FAC was a small, I don't know, was a barrel or something like that in the middle of the sand. But when people caught lionfish in the hook, normally is that they have the luck to, stay over a habitat of lionfish, like a wreck or some rocks or etc. But can happen.
Fishermen also go to a spot where the red snapper is, like 50 meters deep. Do fishermen catch also lionfish with a fish and a hook, or you don't know?
Is not common, happen, but really randomly. Some fishermen report that they catch. The lionfish is found till 300 meters. Is the most deep register of lionfish.
So you can need all the help from the fishermen also,
Sorry?
You can need also all the help from the fishermen also. If they,
exactly. Like
if they get good money for it.
Yeah, it's one of the stuff that we still don't find a good way to do, is, at least here in Bonaire, is involve the fishermen in the lionfish control. Because Bonaire is really diving related. There is other places that use different kind of fishing methods that fishermen catch some lionfish, but they catch a lot of, the target is other species, like Saba Bank, they catch lobsters in traps, and sometimes the lionfish comes. But there is a kind of bill to pay if this happen, like the target species, in that case the lobster, could be in decrease. So the lionfish is just a bycatch. So that's the tricky part. I would love to have some way that the fishermen also can be really involved in the lionfish hunting here in Bonaire and generate income, but we are not there yet.
Thank you.
I can say that it is something that we also once discussed with the fishermen. But what you see is what Paulo is saying. It's not their target species. It's not their common practice. So that also makes that there isn't a lot of desire to integrate this in their normal practices. So we have discussed it in the past. We are discussing it still. But at the moment we do not see the interest to pick this up.
I think there was another question first. Yes. Do you know all those lionfish that are deeper? Do you know the impact on the reef? Like, are they coming up? Are they swimming up on the reef, or they stay deeper and they fish deeper? And what kind of baby fish then they're eating if they stay deeper?
That's an excellent question. Probably, we don't know for sure, but probably the lionfish that stay in deep water, they come to shallow water, they come to the reef. And how I kind of can say that is because if volunteers clean a part of the reef, a lot of volunteers know that after 2 months they can go there and they will find lionfish again. So probably the stock of lionfish is from deep water. And about what they eat, there is some universities that did some research in deep water lionfish, but I don't know, I don't have the results with me, but we can look for that. Yes.
Yeah,
They can eat each other.
Paula, the only stomach analysis I've seen on deep water lionfishes has been from a few that the sub in Curacao collected, because they collect over there, and they were finding largely cardinal fishes, different species, in fact a couple of new species possibly at deeper depths that the fish could feed on in those areas. There's an organization in Florida called Reef in Key Largo. They're doing some research on, I think they call it the Giddings trap. It's a deep water trap, and it's meant to collect specifically lionfishes. There's probably some bycatch, and they're working still to improve that particular trap, but it's a pretty well developed situation at this point, and I think if you contact them, they'll be able to keep you in the loop about what they're doing and what they're testing and how things are working, and you might be able to get a prototype and experiment with it here.
Yeah, I think I think exactly what you say we have been looking for, but still, you know, it's something that we need to keep looking and see what they found. So then maybe in the future we can do some tests here in Bonaire.
Yeah, they've been, I mean, they've been at this for a few years now. It's not a simple thing. I can get you some more information afterwards.
Oh, that would be amazing.
They've got a good team, and they're working hard to try to find something that will work in the deep water environment, right, without the problems of bycatch.
Yeah, I think it's these traps that have like something to attract the lionfish.
Yeah, the structure. It's like the pictures that you showed. They're attracted to whatever structure might be out in the middle of the sand desert. And so if you can put a piece of structure down there, it attracts them. But then you've got to somehow capture the lionfish. That's the part they're working on now. Right? They're putting cameras down to watch what's happening around the trap so that they can learn the behaviors and figure out how to more effectively collect more lionfish at depth. But there's people working on it. Is it baked? Not entirely, but it might be a way for Stinapa to get involved with some of the early work and maybe even do some of the testing.
Yeah, we did some tests in the past, looking for the bycatch, and in the model of trap that we designed was some bycatch. We never pulled the trap; was just diving in deep water the trap. But it's something that we are looking for. I think right now maybe we are close to have some ideal model, but this we need to take, you know, with calm. And yeah, we are really right now putting a lot of effort in the new challenge that we have in the reef, that is the stony coral tissue loss disease.
Are there any other questions? Yes, you'll ask a question.
Not so much about the deep water lionfish, but about the normal diveable lionfish. You said that the amount of elves has gone up from 300 to well over 450, which I'm assuming could correlate to the amount of hours being spent fishing on the reef for lionfish also increasing. Yet I see that in your densities, they're staying the same. What do you got? Have you pulled any conclusions from that? That maybe the actual population of lionfish might be increasing?
No, yes. So your question is, there's more elves out there, so does that translate into more people hunting? And if there are more people hunting and catching more fish, how come the density stayed the same? I don't think there's actually more hours being hunted. So there are more people that have registered elves, but that doesn't necessarily mean there are actually more people also out there hunting. It's a very, from what I understand at least, it's like one core group of very active people, and then some people like myself who go twice a year, but also have an elf.
Yeah, and also, you know, we have a change in the hunters sometimes. There's people that in some moment have the fever of lionfish and they are doing a lot, but in some moment, you know, they just switch to do a different hobby. And this happens a lot. So exactly, that don't means that what Roxanne explained, don't means that just because we give all this number of elves, we have that amount of volunteers, because sometimes people just, the most enthusiastic volunteer is start to be someone that, okay, once per year I want to fish now, I go hunt. Should you want to say something?
I think I might be understanding your question. It's sort of how productive can the lion hunters be if you assume they're equivalent? How much effort does it take to catch a lionfish? Can you compare the data from some of your derbies to other derbies? How many lionfish versus how many participants, and get any sort of idea about, is it getting harder or easier to find lionfish? I know that it's not a perfect comparison, but it might be one way to look at how effective lionfish hunters are being in the density in the water.
I think, you know, is a really good point. All the time we are thinking how much effort or cost of effort we can put to make that number lower. And I think here in Bonaire we have a limit that if we put more effort, it will be so expensive that doesn't work. We need to remind that what we do with lionfish, there is two strategies basically to deal with invasive species. One is eradication, the other is control. We cannot use eradication in the ocean because the ocean don't have fences. Eradication, normally you spend a huge amount of money, but once. And after that you need to just keep some, you know, some monitoring. Control in long term is way more expensive because you don't spend the same amount of money or effort, but you need to keep doing that forever. For example, there is islands that do cat eradication because you know, the cats can be a really huge problem for birds and lizards, etc., for fauna in general, is one island. But there is cities that have huge problem with feral cats too, and they cannot handle very well because what they can do is control because people are still having cats, etc., etc. Fernando de Noronha is one good example of that they have a huge community of feral cats, but also domestic cats, and they cannot eradicate because, you know, people like to have cats. So lionfish is controlled, the strategy, but is a good point.
And I think, so we had that graph showing the density in Bonaire compared to other regions. So Bonaire's lionfish population is already at a low density if we compare it to other areas. But also if we look at, we have other surveys we do, right? Like we do reef surveys and we do fish surveys. We don't see this massive impact of lionfish on fish populations. So what we are doing now is enough. And we continue the monitoring so that if we see something change, then we can say, okay, we need to scale up our efforts. But at this point, from what I know from the data, from what I'm seeing on the reef, we don't have a problem. I mean, the lionfish are there and it's going to be a problem forever, but it's not that we are in a situation where the population is increasing and this is having knock-on effects on other things. We're not at that point yet. Let's see what happens with this year's survey.
Here in Bonaire has been affected by life?
Well, I can't say no species has been affected, but if we look at the overall data of fish biomass on Bonaire, we don't see like a dip in the fish biomass. We just did the last round of surveys in March of this year, and the fish populations are still doing good. They eat different stuff, and they also eat the smaller stuff, so they would be, like if we're talking about groupers, for instance, they would be targeting the larval phases that are a lot smaller. But when we haven't seen, I mean, we haven't had groupers in a very long time, since before the lionfish arrived. But we're not seeing this further decrease in grouper populations, for instance, or parrotfish populations.
I'm hunting daily for some restaurants, and in the low season it's always easy to get enough fish for the restaurants, but high season it's real hard to keep up with for the restaurants to keep the fish available. Is it maybe a smart idea to connect the hunters with the restaurants who sells it? That people who have the freezer full know how or who to contact?
I think from Stinapa perspective, it's a little bit tricky to do that. But I think it's a small island. All the hunters kind of know each other, or know the dive shops and know who are the restaurants that want fish. I will say the other way around. If the restaurants really need some fish in some moment and have some demand to have more fish, the restaurants can use exactly what, the way that we communicate, like lionfish hunters in Facebook, and just do a call. We need fish. If you have fish, bring to us. But I know it's because, let's say, it's not exactly Stinapa that need to manage that.
But maybe you can make some kind of a bridge to say, well, we have a list of restaurants who has lionfish on the menu. Check them out if you want or not.
Yeah, I think this can happen, but also the restaurants can do. In islands, I helped the beginning of the plan for Anguilla in the north of San Martin, and in that time, what we found in Anguilla is that we have a lot of fishermen that start to catch lionfishes by catching lobster traps, and they throw away because they don't know what is that, and they have also accidents. Brazil, the north of Brazil, is passing for that right now. So what we did in that time, we connect these fishermen, we catch some lionfish, we give to the restaurants, to the chefs of the restaurants. They love it. They say, oh, where I can have this fish? Talk with the fisherman there, because he's catching this fish and he's throwing away. So that connection, that is a started connection, we can do it. But I think Bonaire is a small community, the restaurant can easily go to Facebook. Happened before. I saw some restaurants putting, including in some moment that we did some derby, there is some restaurants that say, hey, we want lionfish. But yeah, I think, the restaurants need to do that.
Any more questions? I guess not.
Okay, so thank you so much